All right, I'm Robbie Pitts. I live in Virginia, but I work for Q2 here in Austin. And I wanted to teach you all about what Glimmer is, what it can do, and what it still needs. And so I sort of lied. It's not for profit. It's definitely not production ready, despite it being integrated into Ember already. It has a very unstable API still, and there are many missing pieces if you want to stand up Glimmer by itself. And also, I sort of don't know what I'm talking about. I set out to try to make a Glimmer application on its own, and I wanted to incorporate Redux into it, and I ended up being successful, so I just wanted to share with you all what I learned. So first of all, what is Glimmer? First of all, it's templating. You can do inline templates, which is what I did in my example. And you can also do precompiled templates, which is what Ember does. And then you have angle bracket components, which are also known as Glimmer components, and curly components, which you're probably familiar with in Ember. So inline templating. This is what it looks like. You're probably familiar with the HBS tagged template literal, and this is sort of similar to that, where we have a static getter in this component class, and we're returning just a string, which Glimmer will take and render it. And then we also have precompiled components, which takes a considerable amount more work, so I didn't do that. But this is a hypothetical example. And then angle bracket syntax. This is a component, other component, and it's analogous to this in the curly syntax. So Glimmer is also components. It manages components and renders them. And what a component needs is a layout and a class for local state. So we just saw this. Here's a component layout, cool component, and then inside it is other component with a local variable called message. And then here's our component class that goes with that layout. And we have a getter here, message, which you just saw, and it's just returning hello world. So that's basically the gist of what Glimmer is. It's pretty simple on the surface, but it's super complex under the hood if you've ever looked at it. And I basically don't know anything about it. I'm not smart enough for that. So what does it need to operate on its own? First of all, it needs dependency injection. It basically subsists on dependency injection. That's how components work. It looks up your component classes with dependency injection. But it doesn't ship with dependency injection. You have to make it. So I have some hypothetical examples coming up. I actually didn't make a full-blown dependency injection system like Ember has, but I lifted examples from Ember. So dependency injection, with dependency injection, you register factories, you retrieve instances, and then the most important part, you inject the dependencies. So registration. It's basically just associating a specifier with a factory. So here we have component colon cool component, that's the specifier. And then here we have just a class actually, but we're going to use it as a factory. So if we have like a static create method on cool component, then it's a factory. So we're registering this component here. And then we also need to be able to retrieve dependencies that we register. So we do that with lookup. Hopefully your dependency injection system has the ability to configure dependencies to be singletons or to get a new instance every time you look up. If you're not familiar with the singleton pattern, it's basically just a shared single instance of an object. So if we called lookup multiple times, we'd get the same instance back every time. And then the most important part, injection. And so you may not realize, but when you're calling a component in a template, that's actually dependency injection, because I'm putting my cursor up there. Oops. So this environment class is a class that you have to implement when you're building a Glimmer application. And the way Glimmer renders is it uses this method, getComponentDefinition, to find your components. And so this ellipsis here signifies what we do when we want to look up this component. And then we can also register injections. So this is like automatic injections. So here, this is an example of, on like every component we want to inject on the store property, the store Redux object. So, so our hypothetical cool component class has this do something cool method, and it automatically has the store property on it, which happens to be a Redux store, and we can dispatch actions to it. And one of the really cool features of dependency injection, if you build it, is resolution. So you can look up in the registry when you manually register objects, but you can also look up by resolver. And that's basically mapping your specifier with a file in the file system. So you don't have to actually register your dependencies manually. Another thing Glimmer needs is re-rendering. It actually doesn't re-render on its own. You have to tell it to do that. The way Ember does it is with a backburner listener. And the way I've done it, which is much easier, is in a callback. And this code is copied and pasted directly from Ember. We have the backburner listener. It listens to when we begin a run loop, any run loop, and it calls this function loop begin, and it basically schedules a re-render. So that happens every time you trigger a new run loop. What I've done is use the subscribe method on Redux, and I re-render my app whenever we get new state. So that brings us to the next thing that it needs, is state management. You can store local state in your components and have a big state tree like that, but that's probably not the best idea. So you can use Redux, Orbit, MobX, whatever you want to do. I've chosen to do Redux. And so I made this app class that it's basically a top level object that manages state, and it also is responsible for re-rendering. So we're just creating this new app object and giving it our root element to render into, and we're feeding it our initial state from Redux. And then this is our entry point. So we render our app with this top level component, to-do list app, and we're giving it items that are coming from Redux. And now we're subscribing to the store and updating the app whenever we get new state. Super simple. And here's a method from a component class. We we do the normal prevent default stuff, parse the form, and dispatch an action. And then the other thing is routing. I'm a super big fan of React Router 4, even though I've never used it before actually, but I think it's a really good idea. And so this is sort of my fantasy to implement this in Ember. And so you, instead of defining all your routes in one config file, you just have these matcher components, and when the URL matches that pattern, it renders that component in that spot.
So this is how you wrote.
Exactly. Jeffrey, it's coming. It's coming.
It's up to you.
I don't know about that. And so if you want to see my example implementation and the demo of it, you can visit this URL and take it for a spin. And that's all I got.